few really fun things planned for this afternoon, but first I need to do a few little chores. I'm cleaning up Nigel's pen while he's inside. He makes the cutest little turds.
Hey, Tiny. Hey, girl. All right.
I know a lot of you guys were really worried about Tiny, but she is back to her normal self. When she was at the vet, she got some long-acting antibiotics, so that should clear everything out. It seems like she's cashing in on her daily snuggles for the last couple of days today. It is getting hard for me to actually get any work done with her, trying to coax me to pet her. This time of year, the weather can be pretty crazy, so I want to get Nigel back out in his turnout before it starts raining again. I have been giving Nigel some regular hay just to shake the leaves off and eat, and he has been wasting a ton of hay. I pulled my handy dandy four-wheeler around and am gonna unload all of the saddles I bought from the tack sale. One of them is Stewie's saddle that I brought over from my house. And I do want to say again that this is not a normal activity for a regular horse person to be doing. Buying and selling used saddles is a really good way for someone to make money if they know what they're doing. Nigel has been extra sassy because Prim has come back into heat, and naturally he thinks that she is his girlfriend now. He usually gets along really well with Frisco, but the last couple of days they've kind of been butting heads over Prim. I tried really hard to wiggle out this T-post. I used to have a sprinkler on the end of it, but since I really don't want any grass to grow in here, I am going to take it out so Nigel doesn't accidentally get hurt on it. He was walking a little funny, but it turned out he had a piece of grass stuck in between his tiny butt cheeks. His little water tank has finally started to leak too much for me to continue to use, so he is going to get a new one pretty soon here. Tiny must be feeling so much better because she has been spending a lot of time with Nigel when he's turned out, and she's been sleeping along the edge of his stall at night as well.
You okay?
Nigel wasted no time trying to get covered in filth again. I have been grooming him a lot, so he shouldn't be itchy. I just think he does this to be spiteful.
Nigel.
Even though he does not really like me catching him in the evenings, I think he does like having his own stall where he can lay down and sleep without having to worry about anybody bothering him. Before I show you guys all the new tack I got, I am going to bring in the boys. Some of the saddles I bought, I am planning on using on Stewie and maybe Pete. I have to see which one fits which horse. I think these boys thought that I was going to let them out on some more grass this evening. As usual, little Gus was the first one to want to come in. I'm just going to go ahead and tie all of these boys up in the small arena so they can stand tied for a while. After I caught little Gus, I brought in Stewie. I was kind of surprised, but Big Gus and also Pete let me catch them pretty quickly today. I tied both of them up in the arena to stand with the other horses as well. It is kind of teetering on the edge of storming, so if I have to untie these guys and turn them back out very quickly, I can do that. It is a totally different story if we have a thunderstorm roll in when I'm riding a horse and I have 3 other ones saddled, standing, waiting to get ridden. So for today, I'm just going to give these guys a good grooming and then we're going to try on some saddles.
Oh, Pete. Good boy. You're okay, Peter.
As usual, Pete is a little bit on the jumpy side. This is pretty normal for him, especially during the beginning of the season. He's the kind of horse that gets a little bit worried about everything you do all the time, no matter what. So I just take it nice and slow with him. Gus is still in the process of losing his winter hair, although it has been really coming out now that he is out on the pasture.
Stewie.
And in typical fashion, Stewie is just starting off as a pest. Stewie is turning 5 this year, but he still has a very immature mind.
Stewie. Stu. Come on.
He casually slid over and backed up so he could get his brushing sooner.
All right, Gussie.
A lot of the other horses don't appreciate Stu's shenanigans. He is a lot different than most of the horses I get in. He wasn't even halter broke when he went to the sale, so he had had no other handling prior to me buying him. It is like apples to oranges comparing him and a horse like Pete.
Oh my gosh, Stewie.
I don't know how Stu did this, but he had a whole turd stuck on his forehead. I have been looking at a few of the local arenas that have an indoor that I can go ride at when the weather's not nice, because I have to get after these horses if I ever want to get the new ones broke this year. And Stewie is
okay,
definitely
Pete?
ready for some work. After my initial grooming, I'm just going to go in with a special concoction I make for these guys. It is a mixture of laser sheen and fly spray that's just diluted down. I like to spray it on them after they get a quick brush. Once I curry on top of it, it helps lift all of the dirt off of their coat. All of these boys have been tied up and they kind of know the drill for this. Tying horses up like this and handling them is great for teaching them how to be patient. One of my big pet peeves is when I get a horse and they cannot stand tied properly. Standing tied and being quiet is a really helpful skill to have. You use it when the horses need the farrier or when they're at the vet. If an emergency comes up and they have to stay tied for an hour or two, it's nice to know that my horses can and will do that quietly. A lot of times when I haul them to other arenas or trail rides, they need to be able to stand quietly tied to the trailer. I think a main problem that a lot of people have when their horses don't want to trailer load is they have anxiety about being tied after they get to where they're going. It is something that you definitely have to practice with horses if you want them to be successful at it. So I let my horses stand tied for a lot of time before I ever take them anywhere. After I get these guys sprayed down and curried, you can see that it is lifting all of the dust to the surface. The laser sheen doesn't really make their coats very shiny, but it does help lift all of the dirt and grime off of their coats. And once I'm done brushing little Gus, I can finally go and show you guys what all I bought at the estate sale auction. The first saddle I bought is kind of crazy. They don't make these too much anymore, I don't think. This is an Orthoflex saddle and it has this patented design that is supposed to like levitate the seat above the saddle. They are very popular with the gated community and trail riders, but if you're doing arena riding, they can feel really weird. This saddle came with a matching girth and a breast collar. It does look like it needs a really good cleaning. Here is another shot of the really interesting suspension system that these have. I have no problems taking a risk on a saddle at an auction because I do know pretty well what I'm looking at. This sale didn't have the seat sizes or tree sizes listed on any of the saddles, which isn't really uncommon. I did a quick little test to see how this fit, and it does not feel like this saddle was ridden in hardly at all. I had a heck of a time getting my feet in the stirrups, and it was squeaky as all get out. I am kind of interested to put this on a horse and feel what it's like to ride around the arena, so Frisco Bill will probably get to test ride this one. I snagged a little measuring tape from my tack room to get some measurements. As you can see, all of the boys are being very well behaved. They usually just settle in for a little nap. This saddle's a little bit tricky to measure because it does have those big swells in the front, almost like bucking rolls, that looks like it makes the seat measure a little bit smaller. I got a steal of a deal on this saddle and paid only $165. I'll probably ride in it a few times and then either sell it on eBay or consign it at a local saddle shop if they'll take it. The next saddle that I got was the most expensive one I bought. A saddle like this will be very easy for me to sell if I don't decide to keep it. This is an all-around version of one of the newer Circle Y saddles. They make it super easy to look up the serial number on the saddle, so you can do that online and find out all of the information about the saddle. This one does have, it looks like a 5-inch cantle in the back, so it should be really good for going on trail rides on steep terrain.
Tiny.
Tiny was taking her supervising duties seriously today. This one also did come with a breast collar and a back cinch and a girth as well. Circle Ys all have this little plate in them, and usually that will say the model and have the serial number on it again. This saddle is actually very heavy. I would say it's around 45 to 50 pounds, so I think you could probably rope off this saddle and be fine. I snapped a few photos for some friends that are looking for a saddle just like this. This is a 16-inch saddle, so it's going to be a little bit big for me. It feels like the stirrups are a tiny bit turned on this one, so they must have used this one quite a bit. Judging by the serial number, this saddle was made in 2006, so it's really not that old. The only thing I don't like about it is it has a synthetic fleece on it. This saddle did look a little bit on the narrow side to me. I was thinking it might have been semi-quarter horse bars, but I did look up the serial number and it does have a full quarter horse tree.
Tiny.
This saddle I did end up paying $550 for, but I should be able to sell it for around $1,500 realistically. The next saddle is one that I probably shouldn't have bought, and after feeling it, I do think something is broken under the seat. I did test all of the saddles to make sure the trees were solid at the sale. It can be very tricky to see up to the actual tree, so pulling on the saddle like this and seeing if there's any give is a pretty good way to see if the tree is solid. The most common place that these older trees break is right where the stirrup attaches, so you got to look up under there and you can usually see when it's cracked. Typically one side breaks first, and you might not be able to tell if you just do the little squeeze test that I did. For all you guys that watch my channel that don't really know very much about horses, the rigging on these saddles or where the girth attaches can be at different points along the saddle. This one has one that's a little bit adjustable. Just by looking at this tooling, I think this saddle was probably made in the 90s. When I buy used saddles, I have a lot less reservations about buying one that was made in the 80s or 90s than one that was made currently. Today, I feel like production saddles are made a lot more sloppily and they don't last as long. This saddle also does have a synthetic fleece. The really annoying squeaking sound that the saddle is making is probably due to one of the nails holding the seat strainer on getting sheared off over time. The tree of the saddle is like the bones, and then on top of it, there's a metal strainer that's usually installed. That is something that will probably personally drive me insane. I would have to take apart the entire saddle to try and fix it, so I'm probably just going to leave it be and find this saddle a home where the person doesn't mind the squeak. Somebody who likes trail riding would probably be excited to have it. It might help keep away the bears. I will probably test this saddle out just to see if it squeaks when I'm riding. It might not, but it definitely has some squeak to it when you push on it. This one is also a 15-inch, and judging by the serial number, it is a full quarter horse bars as well. This saddle is actually super comfortable for me. It might be a good one to keep around to ride colts. The squeaking might get them a little bit more desensitized faster. Whoever rode in this saddle last was riding with some very uneven stirrups. This saddle I did pay $400 for, but I should be able to at least get that back when I sell it. I did manage to snag this snaffle setup. This bit is a Jeremiah Watt bit. This is the perfect kind of bit to teach a horse how to actually carry one. I paid $60 for the whole setup, which is less than what the bit cost by itself. I also bought this lead rope, which I paid full retail for, so that was a little accident on my part. These fluffy wool saddle pads are my favorite for starting the babies out. They just kind of like the feel of them better, I found. I paid $30 and $35 for those. I'm pretty excited I got to snag this biothane harness for Skeletor. This stuff is a lot easier to clean than leather, and I hope all of the pieces are here. I didn't really check it too closely when I bought it. I only paid $15 for it. This is the saddle that I am super excited to try on a few horses. It is really well made. It has the center fire adjustable rigging like the last lightweight saddle I bought. It also has heavy duty brass hardware. For the young horses I have that can't have a skirt that's too long, this should work perfectly. I did try and look up some information on the maker, and I didn't really find anything, so it's probably a smaller shop that made this one. The tree is solid and everything seems to be in working order. The seat size is measuring to about a 15.5, which I was expecting because the other ones are about that size too. It does feel like there's a little bit of cushion in the seat. It's not completely hard. It feels like it is going to be super comfortable, so I'm going to go ahead and pop it on Stewie first, and hopefully it'll fit him.
It's all right. You're okay, Pete. Stewie?
Stewie is half Mustang, so his back is really short. I do have a saddle that fits him pretty well, but it's a 14-inch saddle and it's getting a little bit snug on me, so I hope this one works for him. I'm going to use this brand new pad that I snatched at the estate sale. Stewie is 5 this year, so I am really excited to actually start finally riding him. I was hoping he would get a little bit taller, but he has stayed right around the 14 hand mark. He is basically the same exact size as Little Gus, but he does have a shorter back and he's not as muscled up. I can tell right away that this saddle is not really sitting on him correctly. Hopefully after I adjust this rigging, it will sit a little bit more correct. It does feel a little bit too wide up front and it's setting down a little bit too much on his withers. This rigging only adjusts in one place, which is a little bit weird. Usually both sides you can adjust. I would imagine if you don't have this adjusted perfectly for the horse, it could wiggle around while you're riding.
Stu?
Even though I haven't really started Stu under saddle, he has been saddled a gazillion times. I don't know if you can see, but the front of the saddle is really sitting lower than the back of the saddle, and the back of the saddle is kind of popping up. I'm going to go ahead and tighten up the cinch and trot him around a little bit just to see how the saddle settles as he's moving. This will be a good test to see if Stewie is ready for work. All the other horses are still tied in this little arena, so he has to do a little bit more focusing than he would if they weren't there. Stewie is typically cool as a cucumber, and he listens very well to everything I ask of him. And just after a few little trot circles, the saddle has slipped off to one side. I did not make it very tight because I wanted to see how it shifts around, and that's a good indication that the tree is not actually fitting on the horse. If you have a saddle that truly fits the horse, you can leave it pretty loose and it will still stay right where it's supposed to be. Since this saddle doesn't really fit Stewie, I'm going to go ahead and try it on Pete. Pete does have a much wider shoulder than Stewie, so this might be the perfect fit for him. Even though I have had Pete for quite a long time, he still gets the scares whenever a human approaches him, so this is a little bit on the scary side for him. I can't really blame Pete because he had some bad experiences early on in his training, so if he's a little bit suspicious or uncomfortable about something, I make sure to give him adequate time to feel okay with what we're doing. Pete is one that I will never put up for sale. He'll get to stay here forever, so I'm not really too concerned about me riding him all the time or putting a lot of training on him. He is one that really needs to be in steady training to make progress and feel comfortable. He was one of the hardest horses for me to find a saddle that fit him perfectly. I'm always trying to further my education, so a few years ago I did go to a saddle building school. I learned a ton about building saddles and how to fit them properly, and that's helped my horses tremendously. Unfortunately, Pete has a very weird kind of body shape. He has these huge sloping shoulders and a pretty prominent wither. One of the biggest mistakes I see people making when they're fitting saddles is they want a tree that is way too wide for the horse. And it looks like this saddle is also too wide for Pete. I definitely think Tiny is back to her normal self again because she is being pretty sassy this evening. I'm going to lunge Pete a little bit too, even though this lead rope is a tiny bit short to be doing this activity. When Pete is not scared, he is a very, very good horse. I haven't done anything with him since last fall, so this should be a good test to see where his mind is at as well. I am going to snug the saddle down a tiny little bit for him. Pete is a gorgeous moving horse, and I always have plans to work him more over the summer, but then other horses kind of wiggle into his spot. Because I'll never sell him, he does get set on the back burner a lot of times. Hopefully when I'm able to stop doing my real job, I'll have more time for some of these long-term horses. This saddle didn't wiggle too much side to side, but it did settle down on his withers quite a bit. A lot of people think that the tree is supposed to kind of sit down on their shoulders, and there's actually a little pocket behind their shoulders where the tree is supposed to sit. When you use a tree that is too wide, something like this will happen. This is a rub mark that Pete got when he was at the other trainer, and he was only there for a few weeks. I do know that they left him saddled for days and days, so that probably didn't help the situation. One of my biggest pet peeves and a reason a lot of young horses do not accelerate in under saddle training is that people use old or ill-fitting saddles on them. It drives me crazy when I see an old, nasty, broke down saddle and people are suggesting that it would be the perfect saddle to start colts with. In my opinion, you need to find the best fitting saddle to make the horse as comfortable as possible so the process goes very smoothly. I'm going to let Pete just stand with that saddle on and do a few chores before I turn them all back out for the evening. While I'm going around and doing chores, I'm trying to figure out which saddles I might keep for future use and which ones I'll send off to the consignment store or maybe sell locally. You may have noticed that Huckleberry is not around, and it's because of all of these dang gophers. He does do an extremely good job of catching them, but he does tend to eat a lot of them. I did speak with the vet about it when Tiny was there, and they really insisted that he stop eating gophers. This time of year, it is not uncommon for Huckleberry to eat half a dozen gophers every day. I'm hoping to set aside a few days where I can watch him and hopefully train him to stop eating them. Catching gophers is one of Huckleberry's favorite summertime activities, so he has been a little bit blue because I haven't been bringing him to the barn. When I got done dragging the dry lot, I noticed that I had cut my finger. I didn't even notice that I had done it until I was dripping goo everywhere. I'll just zip over to the barn and get some kind of bandage on it, and I'll take care of it when I get home later this evening. I do want to check in on our little nest, and it looks like there are 2 little babies that have hatched recently. I'm gonna have to figure out something to keep them safe because I do have to take the trailer somewhere this weekend. With my finger all bandaged up, I'm finally ready to turn the horses out. It looks like little Gus has been a little bit impatient and has been trying to escape.
Bye, Pete.
I'm gonna take Pete over to the trailer and unsaddle him. Tiny, of course, thinks that I need extra supervision for this.
You're all right.
This is a pretty typical response from Pete. He does get scared of things that he has experienced before, and I just have to do them over and over until he calms down. I try not to get too excited about it, but this is one of the reasons that I will never sell Pete. Many people wouldn't find his shenanigans as endearing as I do, and they would probably try and train it out of him one way or another, but I don't think that's ever going to be something that he really gets over. I have pretty much accepted that he's a little bit on the spooky side, and I treat him a little bit differently than the other horses. I feel like that's something you should take into consideration with all horses, but for some reason that's a really radical view to have on horse training these days. I already put out some hay piles for these boys for their dinner, so they're pretty excited to get turned loose and have some snacks. With the weather being so variable in Montana this time of year, it is pretty difficult for me to have a solid riding schedule. And I am discovering it is a little bit harder for me to plan with doing YouTube this year.
Stewie?
Stewie was really worried that all of the other horses were going to eat his dinner before he got out there.
Hey, Tiny. Come on, girl.
I have a few big trail rides and a few little horse shows planned for the next 2 months, so hopefully I'll be able to get a horse or 2 ready so I can actually attend those. I also have a super fun field trip planned this next week that I'm gonna, of course, take you guys along on. With the horses now on a pretty solid turnout schedule, this spring is shaping up nicely so far. I think I might have to get some kind of birdhouse for these guys and try and transfer them. There is no way they would survive if I just left them up there and traveled all around. I have a pretty good idea about how I can do it safely, but it might be tricky to keep them out of Tiny's reach. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.